Well, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all to tonight's lecture. Thank you for braving the storms, if there were storms in your way. My name is Ian Gow, and I have the privilege of leading a great team at Vaughan Park Anglican Retreat Centre in Long Bay. Some of you will have been, some of you won't. We hope you will all come sometime. On behalf of our board and on behalf of Massey University, we wish to welcome the Reeves family, especially tonight. I hear the siblings have come to do a bit of something as Sarah offers us her words of wisdom. So we'll watch them. This lecture is obviously named in Sir Paul Reeves' name and is in partnership with Vaughan Park and Massey University. I am most thankful to Margaret Kafaro and also Marion and their respective teams for all they have done behind the scenes to make this evening possible. So without further ado, I introduce our guest speakers, Judge Sarah Reeves and her friend Puna Wano Bryant. They come with much wisdom, and we look forward to hearing of it today. The order of service, since I'm an Anglican priest, is the lecture, and then we'll have some time for some questions, and then we've got Kai afterwards. Now, I cannot imagine anyone going to sleep tonight with the lecture of these two ladies. But Puna has said to me that if anyone does, they are going to come up to the front and they're going to have to learn Zumba. She is the owner of Team Azuka, and this style of music fuses Maori and Latino. So, we look forward to some of that in the talk as well. Let us pray before we start. Ko te pai tawhiti whaia tata. Ko te pai tata whakamaua kia tina. Seek the distant horizon until it comes closer, because in it you will find your destiny. Lord, may this land discover your destiny. May we in our own lives discover your destiny, your understanding of goodness and beauty and truth and justice. Amen.
A tēnā tātou. I te rangatira, tēnā koe. Nau te whakatakoto te ara, mō tā tātou hui i tēnei pō. Kei te mihi. E te mana whenua nā te whātua, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. Kia koutou, kua tai mai i runga i te kaupapa o te pō, kei te mihi atu kia koutou. Nau mai, hara mai. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, everyone. And it's great to see such a good number of you out this evening. First of all, I want to acknowledge my mother Beverly, who's here, my sisters Bridget and Jane, who hopefully are not going to heckle me during the lecture, and cousin Gail and husband Kevin, as well as other whānau and friends here tonight. Greetings to Bishop Philip and Belinda. Met Philip at the airport in Wellington today, both on our way north. And thanks also to Vaughan Park, to Ian and Margaret from Massey University for hosting us tonight. And lastly, a big thank you to my friend and whanaunga Puna for agreeing to share this lecture with me tonight. In the very long title to this lecture, we have promised much, and I hope we can deliver. In hindsight, I think the moral of the story is not to come up with the title of your lecture until you've actually written it. Anyway, it's for you to judge how we do. This is the 5th Vaughan Park Memorial Lecture, and tonight we remember and honour my father Paul Reeves, who passed away 6 years ago this week. While preparing for this lecture and reading some of his speeches, I had a moment of serendipity when I realised that one of those speeches was given here at Massey University 8 years ago this week, on the 12th of August 2009, as part of the Chancellor's lecture series. In that lecture entitled "Don't Fence Me In," he discussed how the Māori-Crown relationship had shifted over time and the role of treaty settlements in healing grievances. He said, "In a small way, treaty settlements are one form of peacemaking we need to tell the world about. They're not perfect, but they are significant. Without them, Aotearoa New Zealand today would be a very uneasy place." This evening, we will address some of the same themes from our own perspectives and experiences. In this first part of our presentation, I'm going to discuss some aspects of reconciliation in treaty settlement, and then Puna will speak to us more specifically about Parihaka and He Puanga Haiata. Then you'll get me back again, and I will speak more broadly about restoration and redress, as well as some thoughts for the future. In his later years, my father was concerned with the quality of relationships between Māori and the Crown, particularly in the context of treaty settlements. Because settlements are part of the political process, they represent what is said by the Crown to be possible, and from the claimant's perspective, usually not what is desirable or even just. In his view, reconciliation was the greatest prize, where the monkey is off your back and you can look to new responsibilities and possibilities, he said. My father, of course, viewed this through the lens of his Christian faith. And while accepting not everyone has the same lens, he had no doubt about the potential power of reconciliation to free people to move forward. But as a treaty claims negotiator for Taranaki Whānui ki te upoko o te ika, the mana whenua group for Wellington who settled with the Crown in 2009, he questioned whether the Crown Māori paradigm allowed such a space. In most settlements, he said, the Crown apologises for wrongs done. My unease is that this gives the Crown the last word. And that's always been the problem. We need to go the next step. Reconciliation implies both apology and forgiveness. Taranaki Whānui looked to the traditions and sayings of Te Whiti o Rongomai and Tohu Kākehi, the prophets of Parihaka, and found encouragement to forgive the Crown as part of that settlement process. Now that is a challenging concept. And forgiveness in this context certainly does not mean forgive and forget, or indeed accepting that justice has been done. But in accepting that the treaty process is inherently unjust, the question arising is whether reconciliation in those circumstances can really be effective or long-lasting. In his recent book, Dr. Carwyn Jones makes the case that genuine reconciliation in treaty settlements can occur only when the importance of Māori tikanga and legal traditions are recognised in the process. Now, this last point touches on the necessity of maintaining relationships or whanaungatanga. Whanaungatanga is the core value that underpins tikanga. And the process of settlement with the Crown can be very damaging to relationships between and within whānau, hapu and iwi, which can then affect the ability of communities to reconcile as between themselves and with the Crown. Now, Waitangi Tribunal hearings into historic claims are often described as truth and reconciliation process, whereby the telling and recording of a story has a cathartic effect in itself. But claimant groups can and do miss this opportunity when entering into direct negotiations with the Crown. One innovative response to this was seen in the 2016 Te Rohi o Wairoa settlement, where as part of their settlement process, the grievances of the hapu and iwi members were aired on the marae before former Governor-General Sir Anand Satinand, who then produced the Te Arawhiti Truth and Reconciliation Report, which recorded those stories for future generations. For other groups, the way the Crown apology is delivered can be the most powerful show of reconciliation. This might be a public reading of the apology by the Prime Minister or the Minister for Treaty Negotiations, or in the case of Waikato Tainui in 1995, Queen Elizabeth II read the apology in person to the Māori Queen Dame Te Ata Rangikahu and her people. A descendant of Te Atiawa, my father wrote and spoke often of Parihaka and tohu kākehi and Te Whiti o Rongomai. He felt strongly that the injustice and consequences of the Crown's actions at Parihaka in the late 19th century remained unresolved, which raised wider issues about the basis of our nationhood. He said, "Someone has to say to Parihaka, I accept responsibility, because I have inherited the fruits of what was forcibly taken from you." But he also believed that inside the Parihaka experience lay the seeds of reconciliation and new beginnings. His optimism was ultimately well placed, because on Friday, 9 June this year, the Parihaka Papakainga Trust entered into Te Kawinata o Rongo, the deed of reconciliation, to record a reconciliation with the Crown. Described by Attorney General Chris Finlayson as a day of national significance, this process was outside the usual treaty rubric. And the willingness of both parties to work together and craft such an innovative tikanga-based process to lay to rest a significant historical wrong must be applauded and celebrated. The trustees of the Parihaka Papakainga Trust, chaired by Puna, and following the tikanga laid down by the prophets of Parihaka, displayed the characteristic that J.K. Galbraith says all leaders have in common. They were willing to face the major anxiety of their people, enabling them to lay down their mamae or pain in exchange for acknowledgement of past wrongs and a new relationship with the Crown based on the future development of Parihaka. And with those introductory remarks, I now pass the rākau to Puna.
A tēnā koutou katoa i te iwi, kua huitahi nei runga i te karanga o te pō. Ko te karanga o te pō ko ngā wawata o tō tātou tupuna karaua matua tā pāora. Kua haere ki te pō, ki ngā ringa o te ariki. Nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. I remember tā pāora, Uncle Pāora, had fearless faith and a passion for healing the human community with creative, flexible and genuine processes. So for Parihaka, we had an aspirations framework which looked back in order to look forward. So Te Whiti o Rongomai left for us an important kōrero that provided our aspirations into the future. He pua waiau nō runga i te tikanga. We are the legacy of our tupuna and the tikanga they left behind to guide us, the legacy. He rau ringa nō roto i te raukura. The raukura is our symbol of peace and healing, reconciliation and healing. Ko taku raukura he manawa nui ki te ao. My raukura is an assertion of the resilience and identity of our people. So that aspiration was about Parihaka land, resources and people. So that kept our waka as much as we could on its path throughout the reconciliation process. I just reflect briefly on some of the teachings that Tā Pāora left for all of us, and certainly something that has been important for me throughout this process, healing the human community through enduring treaty relationships. Some of the things he talked about was that it requires leadership with a vision to heal, that settlements can be a form of peacemaking, the power of reconciliation to free people, apology and forgiveness. What is good for Māori is good for everybody, and that it's about new beginnings, not an end or a means to an end. Now to Parihaka. We talk about settlement and we talk about reconciliation, so just to take you through some of the differences in the two processes. The one of settlement is one that we're all more familiar with, having worked in it, many of you in this room, in some shape or form in the past and even now. So with settlements, there is a membership register based on the whakapapa of an individual to an iwi, or a natural grouping. For Parihaka, there was no membership register. Parihaka is multi-layered, has many layers of connection, of whakapapa to the whenua, to the land, and whakapapa to a kaupapa, and a legacy that To'u and Te Whiti left. And as the Papakainga Trust, we are responsible to the followers of To'u Kākai and Te Whiti o Rongomai. So I'll let you think about those layers for a moment. Also, Minister Finlayson went through this process with us with his Attorney General hat on, not his Treaty of Waitangi portfolio. In settlement, it's the historical settlement of Waitangi Tribunal claims, Wai claims. Taranaki iwi, the whenua on which Parihaka resides had already settled their comprehensive claims the year before. So the reconciliation process with Parihaka was about the recognition of the past, yes, but more about future development. And that actually was a luxury for us to have our minds in the space of future and hope for the future rather than historical grievance. It really made a difference. Settlement, when it comes to money and resource, quantum is based on a treaty formula. I won't go into that. Reconciliation, it was the Crown came up with a contribution, a monetary contribution, based on a series of assessments we did on the state of Parihaka at the present day and the needs associated to get Parihaka functioning into the future. Settlement, negotiations, we have a Crown-appointed negotiator and iwi-appointed negotiators. For Parihaka, it was the Parihaka Papakainga trustees at the table with Office of Treaty Settlement staff, and we worked together as one. And I'd like to acknowledge one of our new trustees we have in the room, Nadia. If you just put your hand up there. Newly elected trustee a couple of weeks ago. Also, down the bottom there, you'll see lots of settlement, familiar terms, agreement in principle, historical account, apology, deed of settlement. Now, in Taranaki, there are 8 iwi. 7 have settled with the Crown. We're very settlement savvy. And so all of that terminology and process, very well enshrined. So when it came to Parihaka and the reconciliation process, we did away with all of that. So we had to decolonise and deconstruct our own minds in terms of what was possible. It was a fulfilling process and it certainly helped us to think in the future space. I've missed one there, and in a treaty settlement process, it's based on a vote of members. You get your voting form in the mail, and it's a yes or no vote to the entire package. For Parihaka, we had a series of hui and a survey or a feedback form which dealt with the 11 elements of the Crown package, a ranking scale, so you couldn't just answer yes or no, you had to really think about where you sat on that scale, whether you supported or opposed each element of the package, and why you were answering the way you did. We wanted to know what our people thought and why, rather than yes or no. I'm going to take you quickly through the process because I know some of you are really keen to understand how the process worked. So in May 2014, the Taranaki iwi claims settlement team said no to the Crown's initial offer because it didn't provide anything for Parihaka, the unique claims of Parihaka. January 2015, Kawe Tūtaki was formed. You can see the members there. And their role was to submit a report to the Attorney General and Minister for Māori Development on the potential for support for the Parihaka community from the government. July 2015, they provided their report and presented it to Parihaka, and also, I referred to earlier, the needs assessment. That was what the Crown based their support for Parihaka on. Here are our Parihaka Papakainga trustees. They don't look like your normal negotiating team, do they? Dr. Ruakere Hond had dirt on his knees because he had to dig a trench because the water system wasn't working that morning. We talk about skills and how important skills are in a trust, but I talk about attributes, values and attributes, and that you want your representatives to be a reflection of your people, and they certainly were and are. The Compact of Trust was signed between Parihaka and the Crown in May 2016. We're more familiar with an agreement in principle, which marks the beginning of the process. The Compact of Trust was about an enduring relationship with the Crown, regardless of reconciliation and whether or not reconciliation actually worked out between the Crown and Parihaka. This document surpasses all of that into the future. 25 November 2016, Minister Finlayson presented a letter of offer to the Papakainga Trust, and on the 26th of November we presented that to our people. So we didn't hold on to any information. When we got it, the people got it. It meant we had to come up to speed very quickly with the information and be prepared to answer to that, to the media, to the Crown, and to the auntie who would bail you up at the kitchen table in the wharekai. Our trustees did an amazing job. So basically the package was 11 elements, some of which were in a relationship agreement with 3 local councils and 10 government agencies, an apology, historical account, which we called a legacy statement instead. We turned it on its head and made it different, and the $9 million contribution. We then entered into intensive hui, a series of 9 hui with our people, but from the time we hit reconciliation, puanga haiata, we trustees had had 50 meetings from December to June. So it was an intensive time. In February, we ended our feedback process and the participant connection, just to go back to the different layers of people who connect to pariaka and the way in which they connect. So it's multifaceted, and I know it's challenging and confusing with others, but Matua and I were just talking earlier about the fact that we know who we are. Others may find it challenging and confusing, but we're good. Ka pai. So the feedback process. We asked, this is an example of a couple of examples of the feedback. Do you think an apology statement by the Crown would add value to the reconciliation process? 88.5% of our people were in support of that. Here is what some of them said. What follows is more important. There needs to be consideration of what an apology will actually achieve. It should be delivered at Te Waipounamu, where our men were imprisoned. It could be a letter signed by the Queen, whānau to whānau. An apology will help with healing the hurt and pain held for what our tupuna endured. That's just some examples. Just wanted to pause there on the issue of apology. It was important to Tāpaora, the response to the apology in particular. We said to the Crown that the story of our men who were in prison down south, that their story was largely known. There were records which followed their journey, but our women who were raped by the Crown troops, they needed to be apologised to, and the word rape needed to be used. And because it's a reconciliation process, we said, no, don't tell us that we can't do that because it hasn't been done before. This is the reason why it can be done now and done in a different way. And the Crown went away, and we expected them to come back and say the burden of proof is, as many of you in this room know, is such that there needs to be sufficient evidence to support that those rapes occurred. Te Whiti o Rongomai came back from down south in the jails, and he said of the children running around and playing on the papakainga, nā wai ennei ko purapura. Who are these speckled potatoes? Who do they belong to? Our children running around. We're of Māori and Pākehā ancestry, and the unions from which those children came were not happy or enduring unions. So our whakapapa told us that it happened. Our waiata of our woman, our young woman who had barely reached puberty, told us it happened. And the Crown came back and said that yes, that was valid. That whakapapa, those waiata and those kōrero were valid, and that they would recognise them as historical fact. And that was a huge, the word achievement isn't the right word, acknowledgement to our women and what occurred to them, and for Indigenous women in this time into the future. Secondly, you'll see there, it's the first time when a Crown apology has been delivered that the government officials stood in support of Minister Finlayson. There were no bells and whistles around it, they just stood in support. And also the descendants of the invasion forces were there on the day also, and they are standing in amongst that group as well. Forgiveness statement by Pariaka. We asked our people, would it add value to the reconciliation process? 72.3% supported it. Here's what some of them said. Tohu and Te Whiti would never forgive. That's someone's view. There should be no forgiveness for the injustices towards Pariaka. Another person said, forgiveness is honourable and a necessity towards healing. It will help to lay down the burden of the raru. The $9 million question. 61.9% of our people said they were not happy with the $9 million as a sufficient contribution towards Pariaka's development. I'll skip to, this is some of the responses. They wanted it to be increased, it wasn't sufficient. Some people said, you know, the Crown will give what it gives, but let's move forward. The overall response to the package was that we should move forward. Now, the response to the 9 million was so low, the support, that we thought we had to go back to the Crown and ask for more. In a settlement process, you get asked yes or no to the whole package. You never get asked, is the monetary contribution enough? In this case, we asked our people and we got the answer we were always going to get. I'm proud of us for asking, and I'm glad that we asked. But it's just something for you to think about, that it is never enough. And really it's about what's sufficient into the future. Puanga Hayate, as Sarah said, on the 9th of June, we entered into that. It was an amazing day. Many of you were there, and many of you would have seen it in the news items. It was certainly a day of reconciliation and healing. Puanga is Matariki, or is the Māori New Year, and that's when the event fell at that time. Puanga is Rigel, it's the star that sits above Maunga Taranaki only at that time of year in the country. And Hayata was Te Whiti o Rongomai's proclamation about a new dawn and a new day. So a couple of process principles that came out of it. As I said before, communications. As soon as we received information, our people knew about it. It was up on the websites. Usually negotiators keep it behind and at the table for confidentiality purposes. The media were pretty staunch in coming to us and saying, well, it's in the public domain, we want to report on it. We said, no, it's not for you, it's for us. This is for our people. So please respect that, and they did. And it was about a 6-month process that we used that type of communication. Consensus. If people tried to block because they were unhappy, we didn't use democracy against them, we stopped. We took a breath. We tried to understand the issues, we tried to seek solutions rather than going to the next step in the process and dismissing. The enduring relationship focus, as I said, when the Crown said because it's a negotiation we can't, we said because it's a reconciliation we can. Worked most of the time. Don't plan the whole process ahead of time. Be clear about your purpose, about your tikanga, and design each step as you go. Governance. Back to the picture of the trustees. There were a few of us that didn't agree with the process at all. Don't invisibilise. The process comes and goes and the people remain. You've still got to sit at the table and look at each other, coexist. And I see settlements often damage relationships. Settlement comes and goes, and that damage is still there. And conduct, keeping our people and our kaupapa safe was really important when there's so much hurt in mamae. We have legislation being introduced in August, and we're now focusing on healing and reconciliation and future planning. Back to Tā Paora's whakaaro, and mine also. To lay down our pain in exchange for peace as they laid down their weapons and their lives for us is the least we can do to honour their memory. We will always mourn them, but they didn't make sacrifices for us to live in pain. They sacrificed in order for us to be free. Feel it, process it, lay it down. We can do this, we just need to choose it. And that's the space that we're in at the moment. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Titiro, titiro.
Runga o parihaka waitotoroa, Ngāti moia hu ngāti haupoto, ko te takiritanga I te kahu o wikitori a kaitoa. Ko tōu ko te iti ngā manu e rua, I patu te huariri ki te rangi Māori exau. Ahakwa I te pāhuatanga o parihaka ue. Tēnā koe tuaine.
In this last part of the lecture, I'm now going to talk about restoration and redress in relation to treaty settlements. In terms of time, I was going to talk about, touch on the recent Supreme Court decision in Wakatuan Attorney General, but we might leave that for another day. But first, some context for the treaty settlement process. Since the early 1990s, the Crown and Māori have engaged in negotiations to settle historical breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi dating back to 1840. And following a run of success for Māori in the courts in the late 80s and early 90s, most notably the state-owned enterprises cases, a process to settle historic claims was initiated by the Crown with the Office of Treaty Settlements established in 1995. This policy has been described as a deliberate strategy to return treaty issues to the political arena rather than relying on the tribunal or a court of law. If the treaty relationship is a partnership, then the settlement process demonstrates that Māori are very much the junior partner, with the Crown controlling all aspects of the process. Such bargaining power as Māori have, other than moral authority, is in direct proportion to the desire of the current government to finally draw a line under treaty settlements for political, economic and even moral reasons. Now, settlements generally comprise a mixture of economic and cultural redress, but the media invariably focuses on the financial aspects of treaty settlements and the growing economic power of iwi. This fuels the belief held by many that the process has been reduced to one of property rights. But this is then juxtaposed with the other major public discourse about Māori being at the wrong end of all the key social indicators, raising inevitable questions about how one relates to the other. And that's a whole other lecture in itself. So what is the objective of treaty settlements, and do Crown and Māori have the same expectations? The Crown's policy, as Puna has said, is that settlements are not designed to fully compensate claimant Māori for losses. Instead, redress is focused on recognition of historical breaches, on restoring the relationship between the claimant group and the Crown, and contributing to economic development. And given the massive gulf between loss and redress, more inevitable questions arise about whether settlements can be said in any equitable sense to be full and final. Now, treaty settlements have also not brought about the fundamental changes many Māori have hoped for by addressing issues of tino rangatiratanga. For instance, political and constitutional changes that include tikanga Māori, a greater say in stewardship of natural resources and the environment, and a crown that does not perpetuate fresh breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi. However, there are some hopeful signs. Our recent settlements have taken innovative approaches to significant natural resources. The Ngai Tūhoi settlement in 2014 declared that Te Urewera, formerly the Urewera National Park, has a legal entity. And the Wanganui River settlement earlier this year declares that Te Awa Tupua is an indivisible and living whole, comprising the Wanganui River from the mountains to the sea. And those of us from the 8 iwi of Taranaki have high hopes for the current Taranaki Maunga negotiations. Other settlements too have supplemented modest economic redress with partnership agreements, such as whole-of-government relationship agreements, and increased use of forward-looking partnership models such as Te Awa Tupua or Te Urewera will improve the likelihood, I believe, of genuinely restored relationships with the Crown that look to the future. Now, the Waitangi Tribunal, that I am a presiding officer of, is only involved in settlement through its findings and recommendations informing negotiations, or if its urgency jurisdiction to inquire is triggered by claims of contemporary breaches by the Crown in the settlement process, or if its jurisdiction to make binding recommendations concerning Crown-owned land is invoked. Some of you in the room will know that the Tribunal has yet to make such a recommendation, although that time is now fast approaching following firm direction from the Supreme Court in the Haronga decision. Now, slow progress was made with treaty settlements between 1990 to 2008, although several big settlements were finalised in this early period, including Waikato Tainui and Ngaitahu. There have been various bumps in the road: the fiscal envelope fiasco of the mid to late 90s, when the government sought to cap a total quantum of settlements. More recently, the attempts by governments to timetable completion of settlements by 2014, then 2016, with the current date for completion now 2020. In 2008, in response to the slow rate of progress, the Crown adopted an accelerated settlements policy, and since then the pace has picked up markedly. So I've just put up a slide which illustrates that very clearly. The 2008 slide shows in blue the areas where deeds of settlement had been signed by that date. The areas in the white hatched area were areas that were not in active engagement with the Crown at that time, and the green areas are those where the Crown was engaged. And we of course contrast that with the 2017 map, and you will see clearly the rapid progress that the Crown has been making in the settlement process. The current status is that 83 settlements have been completed in total, including approximately $2 billion in economic redress, with about 54 settlements remaining. Fast-paced negotiations as the government seeks to achieve its settlement completion targets has led to a sharp increase in urgency applications to the Waitangi Tribunal in the past 3 years. In 2015, we had 15 applications. There were 8 in 2016, and in 2017, so far, we have had 38 applications involving more than 50 claims. Now, most urgency applications relate to treaty negotiations and are either groups disputing mandate, recognition, or groups challenging the terms of settlement or representation in iwi settlement bodies. The focus is on large, complex iwi settlements, and one recent high-profile example of this is the Ngāpuhi Mandate Inquiry. Now, groups applying for urgency to the tribunal must establish a likelihood of significant prejudice resulting from a Crown action in breach of the treaty. And claimant groups tell us in the tribunal that the Crown's duty to actively protect their whanaungatanga and tino rangatiratanga run a poor second to expediency as the Crown strives to reach its goal of full and final settlement of all historical treaty claims. There are difficulties, many difficulties, as the Crown and Māori move through this final phase of settlements, and fatigue and cynicism to some extent has crept into the settlement environment and the Māori-Crown relationship in that regard. I hope that the Crown will take heed of the Waitangi Tribunal's expert advice when it is offered. But despite these impacts, there is no denying the fundamental shift in New Zealand society caused by the settlement of historic claims over the last 30 years. Now, this last section of the lecture, because Puna tells me I have time, looks at a couple of issues that just might give some clues as to how the next phase of the Māori-Crown relationship could develop. The first is the national government's decision to establish a Kermadec Ocean sanctuary without consulting Māori. Despite the intention to end without compensation commercial fishing rights that were guaranteed as part of the fisheries settlement in 1992. Now, that was a fairly high-profile event in the media, and there was a strong and united pushback by Māori, including the Māori Party threatening to leave its coalition arrangement with the National Party. Now, that bill, the bill to establish the sanctuary, is now withdrawn while the parties seek to negotiate a solution. And this should serve as a timely reminder to the government not to be complacent about past settlements and not to make the same mistake as the Labour government did with the foreshore and seabed issue, where the right of Māori to have claims determined by a court were legislated away. The Crown may have a bad institutional memory, but I can guarantee you that Māori never forget. Now, the second issue involves the decision in the Supreme Court earlier this year, the proprietors of Wakatu and others versus the Attorney General. And in that decision, the Supreme Court found unanimously that the Crown owed fiduciary duties to the Māori owners of the Nelson 10th's land. Now, the New Zealand company purchased land from the hapu and iwi of the Nelson area in 1839. and various promises were made, and the Crown approved that purchase on the basis that 1/10 of all land used for settlement would be reserved in trust in perpetuity, and that culturally important sites would be accepted from the settlement. And as history tells us, only a small portion of the land was ever reserved. Now, this decision recognises for the first time in New Zealand that in certain circumstances the Crown owes a legally enforceable duty to Māori which is independent from the Treaty of Waitangi or any statute. Now, this was a claim of right and not a political claim, as claims to the Waitangi Tribunal or anything within the settlement space has been or is viewed. The court also acknowledged the importance of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People in determining that the case could proceed despite the breach of duty having taken place 170 years previously. The court found that the plaintiffs had not sat on their rights for all of that time and had taken reasonable steps to seek redress in that time. Now, this case presents an opportunity for the Crown to consider whether it is willing to restore its honour in those cases where there are clear legal breaches which are claims of right which can be determined by the courts. This is also a further opportunity to consider the value and application of tikanga in our law. Now, much has been achieved in the settlement of historical treaty breaches, but there is still much to do. And Puna and I have given you a snapshot, I guess, tonight of our experiences and our knowledge gained from our respective involvements in the process. And I like to end this evening by repeating my father's words from his lecture here in 2009. In a small way, treaty settlements are one form of peacemaking we need to tell the world about. They're not perfect, but they are significant. Without them, Aotearoa New Zealand today would be a very uneasy place. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kua mutu. Now, do we have time for pātai? Okay. Yeah. So we have some time available for questions, I understand. Does anyone have a question? Or any comment?
While people are waiting to be courageous, thank you, Puna. Thank you, Sarah. I am humbled by what you have offered us. It is often said that prayer is the cry of a broken heart. I sense we have all received something of the broken hearts of your people's story. And so I thank you for bringing that to us tonight. As people ponder what to ask, may I ask two questions which you could consider. The first is to you, Puna, and you must feel absolute permission not to respond to it. But somewhere I read in something that you had written that your faith had been a huge part of the process of dealing with the pain that you knew through these different processes. And so I was wondering if you could share something of that process of pain and healing for yourself, if that feels right. Sarah, in South Africa there was often internecine suspicion between the tribes, let alone anything else. How do you work through the tribal complexities even before you get to the crown complexities?
Tēnā koe pā moto pātai. I feel blessed that I have been brought up with faith and tikanga. Very blessed, and Sarah and I will share in that we're grateful for the upbringing that we've had. And that shaped and moulded how we interact and how I interacted with my people through Pariaka. So it was simply just following that legacy that was handed down. So I'm very, very blessed. My Christian faith has played a huge part, and the Jeremiah 29:11. For the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. That was really it for me. It certainly helped me. And tikanga and reo, really important. And pariakatanga. So Nadia and her whānau were brought up at Pariaka. My grandmother was, then I moved away as our parents did for work. But I was always brought up with a strong connection to Pariaka. And so I feel for those of our people who haven't had that connection. And again, I'm blessed for having had that throughout my life.
The question, as I understand it, is in relation to where we have competing, for want of a better word, people before us in the tribunal. I guess I approach it from this perspective. It's not our role in the tribunal, Waitangi Tribunal, to tell people who they are. However, we will interrogate the process by which the Crown has satisfied or supposedly satisfied itself in relation to the interests which are, I'm talking in the settlement realm here, the interests which are proposed to be settled. And it's never as easy as drawing lines on a map. Like here, we have layers of interests, different interests of different nature. For instance, we see some of that playing out in Tauranga Moana at the moment in relation to the Hauraki settlement. The people of Tauranga Moana feel that the terms of the Hauraki settlement mean that those people will be able to come further down the coast than they feel they are entitled to do. I'm just glad that I'm not going to be anywhere near trying to work that one out. I think that's an issue for the Attorney General to resolve, I think. It's gone past us. So not trying to avoid the question, but the basic principle is it's not for us to tell people who they are, but we will ensure that the Crown has properly undertaken proper processes to satisfy itself. Kia ora.
Okay, you've had enough time to build courage. Any other questions? There's a gentleman here, Sarah.
Kia ora, Bob.
I remember Sir Paul once saying that how to apologise has become very easy for the government. And there was a point at which there was a process they were involved in, you understood it, you took part in it, what it went. And there's an example of what happened. The sad thing is that was a process for Maori to be involved in with government in the name of the people. But in general in New Zealand, Pākehā people, non-Maori people, have not been part of the understanding of the process, have not been understanding the commitments that are made and even the setups there. So my point is, always in a process of apology, there's two parts to the apology. That was given, that which is sought, that which is worked upon. And I'm saying it's very clear it's being worked upon there, but I don't think it's being worked upon in our society.
Can you do this?
And our history may show that.
That's not the question. So everyone can have. Sorry.
I will reflect that back, Bob, and if I've got it wrong, you'll let me know, won't you? So Bob was really talking about the way in which we apologise, or the apology is received. And that really, at the end of the day, it's not something that should just be bang, put on the table, end of the story, we've said sorry, now let's get on with it. But it should be a living thing, a relationship, as opposed to just, I've apologised, it's all over, Rover. Have I got it? Yeah. I agree. And I think more recent iterations of the apology component probably reveal that that is improving, but I think it's fair to say the apology is negotiated. The terms of the apology are negotiated. So Puna talked about what it was really important to have acknowledged. And, I was present at Parihaka with my sister and my cousin. It was such a powerful moment to hear the ministers, Minister Finlayson and Minister Flavel, deliver that apology and have all the Crown officials standing and descendants of the constabulary as well. That was at Parihaka. It was so powerful and it left you thinking, well, if it happened like this every time, we are a better country for every time it happens.
Kia ora.
Can I ask about the coverage of Parihaka? You mentioned in the talk that because it was framed as a reconciliation process, that things like the Waiata were really important.
Excuse me, can you speak up?
Oh, sorry, we're going to have the...
I'll repeat the question back for you.
I was just asking about in the coverage to Parihaka. Puna in the talk talked about the Waiata as being a really important part that was accepted by the Crown as evidence as part of this reconciliation process. But in the news coverage, in the news coverage that we heard, at least on the radio, they didn't air any of the Waiata. They made an announcement that said we can't share the song on the radio. And I wanted to ask about that because it seemed to me like obviously the sensitivity is there, but on the one hand there's an official acceptance of it, so there's some kind of acceptance publicly from the Crown that things like Waiata were sort of taken as evidence, but also there was sensitivity. I was hoping you might explain about that a little bit.
Kia ora, thank you for your question. So the first part is what the Crown took into account when deciding to apologise for the rape of the woman, and Waiata, whakapapa and kōrero were valid. was valid evidence in support of that. So that's one thing. On the day, the woman performed a poi called muriahiahi, which is of the 14-year-old girl I spoke of who was raped by the invasion forces. And from a tikanga point of view, those who were there on the day were to witness it and be a part of it. It wasn't for public consumption after the event. So really it was a tikanga approach to the way in which that waiata was performed on the day, and also it's a waiata that you won't see again. The kaumātua were very clear that it was just for that day, because the whole day was about moving from pain into peace, and so they wanted to leave it there that day. And so just going back to what Hera was saying about the apology and Tāpaura's concern about the Crown getting the last say, that the apology and the symbolism around that is often that the Crown apologises and that's it. That's why forgiveness was so important to Tāpaura. And we talked about the Christian construct behind forgiveness, and that for some of our people, if they don't have the faith that some of us share, that's not palatable. From a tikanga point of view, forgiveness is not really who we are. So what we've discussed is that from a tikanga point of view, when someone does something, you need to respond. What that response is and how it takes place depends on the kaupapa. So the Crown have apologised, that puangahaiata. We haven't responded to that yet. The people want some time to lay down their pain, process it, and then decide on how they might respond in the future. To'u Te Whiti said, e te kāwana kei a koutou te pāua tuatai, kei a mātou te pāua tuarua. The Crown, you had the first plunder, the first say. We will have the last say. And it wasn't meant in an aggressive sense. It was, we will, when the time is right, take back the mana in that context. But we don't know what that is yet.
Sarah, thinking of Te Whiti's original vision, and the sense of the burden of the land lost, is the next really logical step some kind of appropriate power sharing, way in which the land is the care of all the people? And is there any sign of the Crown beginning to recognise that that is the logical next step?
Land. Righto, patu iwi, it's a bit of a... What do you think? Just to get some clarity around your kōrero and your question, so you're talking about the Crown should be considering land as a part of settlements. Taranaki is a raupatu iwi, so we're trying to think of how it might be able to provide that as a solution when it's confiscated and privately owned now.
More joint administration and joint working together.
Okay. All right. Well, I think the examples I gave during the lecture of Te Urewera and Te Awa Tupua are both, in a sense, joint management. So you have Crown and, certainly on Te Awa Tupua, there are Crown and iwi representatives who are the guardians of the river. With the Te Urewera management, I understand that that structure of that co-management is going to change over time. So at the beginning of the settlement, you had a higher proportion of Crown representatives, and as time goes on, there will be a greater proportion of iwi or ngai tūhoi representatives will be on that board. So those are the two examples that spring to mind immediately, and of course those are in relation to specific natural features which involve, certainly in the case of Te Urewera, a lot of land. So I mean, I think that the current minister seems to be very creative, obviously within the constraints that he must operate in, to look at all kinds of solutions for specific situations. And I suspect that there are going to be a lot of non-iwi groups who are going to be looking at what happened in Parihaka to think, is there anything there for us? You know, in terms of how the Crown approached or arrived at the agreement with Parihaka. So I think there will be more of that, but as Puna said, certainly in Taranaki, most of the land went. And, you know, so when we come to that issue of redress and loss, the losses were so huge that, and there were very few Crown properties that were available, you know, when it came to providing Crown properties as part of certainly the Te Atiawa settlement that I'm a beneficiary of. Yeah. Does that answer the question, Peter? Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. That was great. That's awesome.
Kia ora. I just was curious about the process itself. When you mentioned that traditionally there's a yes/no that people get to answer back, but you'd managed to expand that into, well, we're dealing with reconciliation, so we're going to get more from people. To what extent is the process a very Pākehā way of dealing with things, and to what extent is there a challenge or a difficulty in dealing with the process? I'm not using very good words, sorry, but that you're then needing to try and honour your own people and their ability to be heard. I'm curious as to how that works. Does that make sense?
Democracy question. You try and bring everyone with you, but at the end of the day, you have to have the yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah. We were just having a quick discussion as to whether that was the democracy question. And the best processes are tikanga-based processes. But in settlement, at the end of the day, there will be some kind of accounting for people's views. And usually that will be a vote. You know, even in Parihaka, you know, they voted. Now, there are some examples of that are better than others. You know, you had all kinds of views, you know, of not just, yes, do you support this, or no, do you reject this, but they asked their views, the views of the people on all kinds of things. So they had a really, you know, a well-developed view of the opinions and thoughts and feelings of their people. Now, I see lots of examples in the matters that come to the tribunal where we do not have processes which are as good as that, where it is often as simple as all of you people who are a descendant of this tupuna vote as to whether or not you accept this settlement, or whether you want these people to represent you. and there may not have been a very good consultation process which had been run before that. So, but I think however much we might feel queasy about that democracy point, some people are always going to disagree, and at some point the majority will want to move forward, and it's often the way in which that is done, and respecting the views of those who have a different viewpoint and ensuring that they are heard and their concerns are heard, but that they also understand that maybe the majority wish to move in this direction. So, this is what we referred to about the damage that can be done through these processes to relationships within iwi and hapu and even whānau. So it's a fairly kind of roundabout answer, but I think it touches some of the points.
Actually, I've got a couple of examples of how the critical view, or what is seen as the negative view, can actually shape change. And so, for example, the apology. As you would have seen on the slide, the majority were in support of an apology from the Crown. There were some critical comments around who would deliver it. As you would have seen up there, it needs to be the Queen. So the Governor-General was going to deliver the apology, and it was going to be the first of its kind in that regard, as the next in line to the Queen. And it was the timing, because the dates changed quite often and they were unavailable. But that critical view, encouraged our team to ask the question of the Crown. Another example was the historical account. So we asked our people about that. The majority were in support, but the more critical view was that it was too much about the Crown's interaction with Pariaka, that it was all about Pariaka's response to the Crown interaction. It was too chronological, a little bit technical. So we said, right, our people want one, but now we can change the way in which we do it because of the critical view. So we turned it on its head, as I said, and we turned it into a te reo Māori focus. And we talked about using the proclamations of our tupuna, the history of Pariaka, koira. So it changed the whole way we developed what we now call the legacy statement as opposed to a historical account. So the critical view is really important. Thank you.
Kia ora. I recently, with the New Zealand Historical Federation, had the privilege of visiting Parahaka, being welcomed and also moving around some of the redouts and sites around Taranaki. My sympathy is completely with Parahaka and what was done to them, and I read the book Ask That Mountain afterwards, as I was invited to when we were there. What I'm concerned about was there's a huge amount in the media of that time, I'm talking about the 1880s, which must be residing in the papers past and things like that, with a very biased European opinion of what went on down there. And I feel that, speaking to some of the people in Taranaki, they didn't have the same sympathy with Parahaka that I felt. And I just wondered what the reconciliation is with the residents in the Taranaki area, because I think that if they look just at some of the paper clippings, they would be totally have a different view about reconciliation and, what can be done to improve the relations there with people who don't read the books and don't ask questions.
I'll just make one comment in response to that, and then I'll hand to Puna. The Te Kawe Tūtaki, who were the group that was put together to help get this process, the reconciliation process, going. One of the members of that group was Jim Bolger, and it transpired that Jim Bolger had grown up. Is it Pongere? Rahotu, which is very close to Parihaka. I think he'd gone to school there. And I think I can remember Dad saying, Mum, when you and Dad were living in Okato back when we were there, in the mid-60s, Dad was the vicar of Okato. Dad was invited to go and judge a young farmers' debate, and Jim Bolger was in this young farmers' debate. But the comment was that Jim Bolger made was that as a young person growing up there, just down the road, essentially from Parihaka, he had no knowledge whatsoever of that place or what had occurred there. And I don't think that is there's others who live in Taranaki, Bishop Philip, you live there, and I don't think that that's an isolated story. I mean, the whole of Taranaki, when you think about the events, the land wars started there, the dreadful events which happened there in the second half of the 19th century, and it would be my impression that there would only be very few who know or appreciate or really even care too much. It's all history, that's all happened a long time ago, would be the view, I guess. So I think that is a great question. The relationship elements of that reconciliation, how do you get outreach into the community? So maybe Puna might have some answers as to how that is going to happen.
Actually, kia ora hira, thank you. It's one of the criticisms that is being made of settlements as well, is that it focuses on the iwi Crown relationship, and that iwi has a community of Pākehā, non-Māori, and what is their understanding of the settlement in their own area. The settlement packages don't provide for ongoing education and awareness within those communities. So it is definitely a criticism. But in terms of Pariaka, every 18th and 19th of every month, because of the legacy, it opens its doors to all people. 18th for Te Whiti, 19th for To'u, is a place to come and learn. So just so you know, whenever you want to come and learn, 18th and 19th of every month.
Okay, we'll have one more question, and then Kai's comment.
Oh, good.
And while we don't need to have a question, but if there is someone, Bishop Richard, I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you come and close with something erudite and full of prayerful meaning?
Wise.
Bishops have to earn their keep. Thank you, sir. Kia ora, thank you.
Could I just offer another response to that last question, which recently we experienced in New Plymouth, the reaction to the Mayor's effort to advocate for a Māori ward in our local body context. And it initially passed, and then there was a petition which kind of scratched the red neck of Taranaki pretty directly. And that petition led to the overturning of the agreement to provide for a Māori ward. Andrew Judd, the Mayor, invited people to join him in a walk to Parihaka and asked the question about whether or not if we walked together we might find a different way of talking with each other, that the action might transform the conversation. And that was true of that experience. But what it was indicative of, I think, was that the conversation with Māori isn't engaged in. And as a consequence, the healing that is needed for all of us in Taranaki is only just tentatively beginning. I want to also acknowledge, Puna, your extraordinary leadership in this whole process, and just your commitment to keeping people talking with each other, keeping everyone in the same room, and that must have been at significant cost to you. I just want to acknowledge you and say that the respect and the love that Te Paure had for you is well placed, and he would be enormously grateful for who you are and what you are, and he'd be kind of proud of you too. Okay. Off we go then.
Just before you say a prayer for them both.
For myself.
Are we present just to say thank you so much for all that you have brought to us? And I echo the words of the Bishop that you brought it at a cost, so thank you. And we have some flowers for Lady Reeves. So I thank you for the Reeves family being here, and a thank you to you both for all that you have given from your soul.
Thank you, Ian.
Let us pray. May in everything that we do and everything we say bring glory to you, Creator, Redeemer, and Life-bearer. May we bring peace to all your people. May we recognise the providence of this good earth that nourishes and sustains us. And may we so commit ourselves to this creation and to each other that what we hand to those who follow us is deeper, richer, and more sustainable than that which we ourselves have received. May we rejoice in the legacy of the past, as painful as it can be, and may we allow it to direct us into a future which is genuinely based on peace and justice and righteousness. And may we constantly relearn the lessons of forgiveness. And for Te Paura, may he rest in your embrace. May he rest in peace. Amen.
Kia ora.